Welcome to week 4. We'll start with our primary text, chapter 10. In this chapter, we explore the opportunities to use some theory-based findings to enhance our crisis communication. So some good examples in there of how we take theory and apply it to crisis communication. Keep in mind that theory helps inform us, but also helps improve our practice of crisis communication. One of the key points that your authors make in this chapter is that whether messages are written, spoken, mediated, the ultimate goal is the same. And that goal in most crisis communication research is to enrich and expand the options that are available to maximize the effectiveness of communication during a crisis. Now, scholars are consistent in their recognition of the fact that traditional media still provides the most expedient route to delivering crisis messages to the biggest audience. I know sometimes we can get wrapped up in text messages or social media or other ways to communicate, but don't forget that traditional media is still key for any crisis communication plan. Because it's key, make sure that you include media training as part of your crisis communication plan, and of course that training should happen long before a crisis erupts. So you should be doing that routinely within your organization. Media train those people who would have the greatest opportunity to get your message out, especially during a crisis. Of course, the relevance of social media, not in question anymore. It's not about whether or not you will use social media, it's how well you will use it. And of course, that should be a key part of your social media. Social media should be a key part of your crisis communication plan. Now, one word of caution. You can go ahead and develop messages specifically for Facebook or Twitter, Instagram if you're into that. Those are pretty much the top 3 that we think of today when we study social media. But keep in mind that you have to be flexible because platforms could change. Some of you may remember MySpace. I suspect that you probably will not be including MySpace as part of your crisis communication plan. At some point, Facebook or Twitter could be replaced with something else, or those 2 platforms themselves could evolve. So just keep that in mind. And the good news for communicators is that the basic principles of effective communication, they don't really change much, regardless of what platform you're using. And to that point, your authors note that those affected by a crisis, think about a natural disaster, a terrorism effect, some explosion or leak, or eruption, or something along those lines, the people that are affected, they're not so interested in your plan or how you communicate that plan. First and foremost, they want to know what kind of instructions they need to stay safe, and then what you're going to do to help mitigate the crisis, as well as follow up and help ensure that crisis does not happen again. And those principles stay the same. So keep those folks at the forefront of your communication, those impacted, and you'll be fine, regardless of what medium is most effective for your particular crisis or the particular time in which your crisis erupts. All right, I will start with the Coombs reading from 2015, The Value of Communication During a Crisis. The article extracts some lessons from crisis communication research, and then they develop a set of guidelines that can be used to inform crisis communication efforts. So I encourage you to look at that, not just for this course where you'll be able to pull some good lessons, but also for your own work if you do crisis communication, or if you're in an organization and have the ability to either draft or influence a crisis communication plan. Keep in mind there are broadly 2 kinds of strategies for crisis communication: managing the information itself and managing meaning of information. For the sake of brevity, I won't go too deep into those, but I encourage you to take a look at that. There's some interesting insights in there for you. And I also encourage you to take a look at Table 1 of the Coombs 2015 article. Table 1 gives a nice overview of crisis response strategy guidance. And this may be helpful to you as you develop your crisis communication plan. All right. The Austin, Fisher, Liu, and Jen 2012 article, How Audiences Seek Out Crisis Information. The study explores how audiences seek out information from social as well as traditional media. And then interestingly, they look at the factors that affect media use during a crisis. Now this is important because if you're developing your crisis communication plan, you want to know what works and what doesn't. So their research will help inform you on that. They use the social mediated crisis communication model. You'll hear that over and over again throughout the course or any other studies you do for crisis communication. Sometimes it's abbreviated SMCC, social mediated crisis communication. They look at the Gulf oil spill, and one of the things I noted is that at the height of the spill crisis, BP's real Twitter account, which is @B_America, they had more than 18,000 followers. Not a lot. Unfortunately, there was a fake BP Twitter account that had more than 190,000 followers. Now this highlighted the increasing importance of monitoring social media and for understanding the effective use of social media during a crisis situation. Not good that your official message is going out on a platform with 18,000 users and a fake account has 190,000 users. Regardless of whether you're in a crisis or not, if you haven't already done this, check other accounts that have your organization's name. Is there some account out there that may have your name that is putting out information that is not consistent with your values? And if so, there are ways that you can reclaim that account if you need to, and you need to go through Twitter or Facebook or wherever social media platform. It's not an easy process, I'll tell you. I had to do it with the Navy command I was in, and it took a long time and some high-level discussions to get that. But even if you can't gain control of it, at least you're aware of it. There's nothing worse, especially during a crisis, than not being aware that some messages are going out that are not official messages, but people may think that they are official. All right. Next article I'll discuss is the Vandermeer and Verhoeven 2014 article, Emotional Crisis Communication. I like this article because sometimes, especially those of us who research, we get all focused on things other than the emotion, right? We like to think with our head. We like to be objective. But emotions play a big key in communication. So it's helpful for us to step back and look at the effect that those emotional communication will have, especially during a crisis. Your authors note that crisis situations often result in emotionally charged communication. I think that goes without saying, but it's important to understand that emotions may run high during a crisis for good reason. Some people may be fearful. There may be health risks involved. Some people may be angry. Some people may be sad. There's all kinds of emotions, and we as communicators need to be sensitive to those emotions. In crisis communication, emotion communication plays as important a role in assessing the effectiveness of crisis response as any other kind of communication, what you might refer to as fact-based communication. So think with your heart and your head when you are communicating at all time, but especially be sensitive to that during a crisis. All right, Kim and Cameron have an article from 2011. That's the Emotions Matter in Crisis, kind of a follow-up to the Vandermeer article. The study examined how emotional news coverage of corporate crisis kind of provides a frame for studying the influence that people have, the emotional influence of their response, which of course influences their perceptions. We all know that perception equals reality, so if emotion is influencing their perceptions, then that perception becomes their reality. Their experiment revealed that the emotional news frame affect people's emotional response to a corporate crisis, such as one of the examples they give is the cell phone battery explosion, and there are other examples that they give as well, but the outcomes were very similar. Also, the emotional frames affected how individuals perceive different types of corporate responses. The advantage, of course, of emotional appeals was found contingent on how the crisis was previously framed by the media. If you have a positive impression of an organization prior to a crisis, that's going to influence how your emotions react during a crisis, once a crisis appears. So keep that in mind. And then, of course, the study provided some practical implications to develop effective crisis communication strategies. I encourage you to read those and compare those to the other strategies that we'll discuss throughout this term. There's a figure 1 inside that Kim and Cameron article. That's a model of crisis communication processing, a pretty good model, and I think it does a pretty good job of kind of simplifying their findings in a way that could be helpful. All right, next article is Schultz, Utz, and Goritz from 2011. Is the medium the message? We debate this all the time in communication. What's more important, the medium or the message? The answer is yes, they're both important. And we have to focus on the message as well as the medium that is most effective depending upon the audience as well as the situation. And in some respects, the sender as well. Whether it's you as the spokesperson giving the message, maybe your CEO, some operations officer, whoever is giving that message. All right, so from their article, they describe how social media plays an increasing role in social construction of a crisis. I don't think that surprises anyone, although it is good to have research to back that up. Sometimes we think, well, of course, that makes perfect sense. But common sense is not that common oftentimes, and so it's helpful to have that research to back up what we believe to be true as maybe a hunch or just our own anecdotal experience. Another finding I'll point out from their article is that an organization that reacts quickly via social media in a crisis response, they signal concern and commitment. Especially in today's age, we don't have a lot of time. Okay, so if you are in an organization that is subject to crises, consider some sort of either 24-hour watch or 24-hour duty or someone on call 24 hours. You don't have time to handle it during a normal workday, especially if it's a big crisis. You need someone who has the authority and the ability to respond in real time. It's too late if you wait till the following workday. Okay, final article we'll go over is Kim and Sung from 2014, revisiting the effectiveness of base crisis response strategies in comparison of reputation management crisis responses. Kind of a mouthful, let me break it down for you. All right, number 1, no organizations are free from crisis. Some may be bigger than others, some may be more frequent than others, but every organization is going to suffer some sort of crisis, and every organization should be prepared for a crisis. And if you're a communicator for that organization, you play a key role in the preparedness for a crisis. One-sided messages contain arguments only in favor of an organization. I see that way too often. It's all about what do we need to say and how do we need to say it rather than what does our audience need to hear and how do they need to hear it. That's a big difference. Okay, so flip that around. If you think that what's most important are the messages you want to get out, what's most important to your organization, especially during a crisis that will affect others, which many crises do. Actions from your organization or inactions, a lack of action from your organization could very well impact the health and welfare of others, and so it's those others that you should be concerned about when communicating. It's not just the right thing to do in general, it's the right thing to do for your organization as well. Their findings suggest that crisis managers should carefully evaluate transparency in their organization. That's something you're not going to change with a communication plan. You either have transparency threaded throughout your organization in everything you do, or that lack of transparency will certainly be revealed during a crisis. And so that's another opportunity as a communicator to help just on a day-to-day basis to help encourage your organization to be a transparent one. And that culture of transparency will help during any potential crisis. Okay, a lot to go over. As I advised you, or I advised you on previous weeks, take a little bit at a time, pull out those quotes that you think are going to be helpful to inform your work throughout this time. And I would say even more importantly, pull out those things that you think will be helpful on a practical matter for your personal and professional development. All right, stay ahead with your assignments. Stay engaged in the discussion board. And as always, enjoy this time of learning.